Hi everyone, Γεια σας και καλώς ήρθατε to another episode of Dimitra's Dishes. Today we're making the most delicious tahini brownies. These are going to be rich, moist, fudgy, just so good. Everything you want in a brownie. They taste even better the next day when they get nice and cold. They taste like just rich bites of fudge. So good and healthy because they have tahini in them. I'm going to show you how to make the vegan version as well. The whole recipe is pretty much vegan, except I am using 2 eggs in this recipe, but I'm going to tell you about the substitute that I've used that works while we're making it. Make a hot cup of coffee or pour some milk for the kids. Get a batch of these going in the oven because you're going to love them. Let's get started. All right, so I'm starting with a double boiler. I just have a couple of inches of water steaming in a pot. You can also melt the chocolate in the microwave if you prefer. So over here I have about 5 ounces of semi-sweet chocolate chips. This is all I had. It was hard to find the baking chocolate bars, but if you have chocolate chips, you could use them. Just know that they do melt a little bit thicker than baking bars. And then I have a 2-ounce bar of dark chocolate. You can make this with all dark chocolate. Sometimes it's called bittersweet chocolate, all semi-sweet chocolate. It just depends how sweet you want it. Bittersweet is less sweet, obviously. So you need 7 ounces of chocolate. That goes in there. Now, if you want to use butter instead of olive oil, it's going to have more flavor and less of the, the heaviness that olive oil has. But I'm going to use olive oil just to keep them, vegan, basically. So 4 tablespoons. If you're using butter, you're going to need about 4 ounces, which is a stick. And you keep this over the heat, or the water that's steaming. You don't want it to be boiling, otherwise it's going to burn the chocolate. And you just keep mixing it until the chocolate is completely melted. So while the chocolate is melting, we're going to get the rest of the ingredients together. I have a cup of granulated sugar in here, and I am adding 2 eggs. You don't have to add the eggs. I made this yesterday using the flax egg substitute that I used in my walnut cake, and it worked perfectly. I do like the way the eggs work a little bit better, so it's up to you. We are not vegan, so I don't mind adding the eggs. But if you're fasting for Lent or you keep, things vegan, then just use the eggs instead of the flax eggs. And the flax eggs measurement is going to be on the blog post. So before I use the whisk to whisk this up, I have the dry ingredients here, which are 2/3 of a cup of all-purpose flour. That is 90 grams. 3 heaping tablespoons of unsweetened cocoa powder, which is 20 grams. I have a 1/4 teaspoon of salt and 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. If you're not using the eggs, then go ahead and use a whole teaspoon of baking powder. It's going to help it rise a little bit better. Just whisk everything all together. And that's it. The dry ingredients are ready. It just comes together so quickly. You're just going to need a few bowls. That's the only thing. Whisk the eggs together with the sugar. And I'm also going to add 3 teaspoons of pure vanilla extract. Tahini is a strong flavor. And to balance it out and just make it nice, just more delicious, I like lots of vanilla. So 3 teaspoons of vanilla. And you're just going to whisk this together until it's nice and thick. If you're using the flax eggs, you don't even have to do this step. You put all of the wet ingredients together and then you whisk them up until everything is smooth. But beating the eggs a little bit more helps the batter rise a little bit more and get a little bit of that crackle that everybody loves whenever they bake a brownie. And do not forget to whisk the chocolate. Okay, that's good enough. The more you whisk eggs, the paler and thicker they become, and you can take it a little bit thicker than this, especially if you're using a hand mixer. That's going to be much easier. If you're melting the chocolate using the microwave, you want to do it in about 20-second increments because the microwave is very strong, and if it burns the chocolate, you're going to have to throw it out and start all over. That's why I really like using the double boiler method. You're standing here, you're watching it, and it just won't burn. Once you have just a few chunks of chocolate left, you can take it off of the heat because the residual heat of the chocolate will continue to melt those last few bits. So now it's time, once the chocolate is melted, now it's time to add the tahini to it. I love Soom tahini. This is one of my favorite brands of tahini, the Soom. Second favorite is Whole Foods 365 brand. They're both really high quality tahini. You never get that bitter, burnt flavor that sometimes tahini brands tend to have. This is definitely not sponsored, but if they want to sponsor me, I'm open to it. but this is just a brand that I like, and I like sharing with you the brands that I like, so that way you don't end up getting a brand that's not that great. And then what happens is your whole recipe is messed up. So we need 3/4 of a cup of tahini, and that is 170 grams. If you're not a fan of tahini, there are people out there that don't like sesame flavor. You can use peanut butter in this, cashew butter, really any nut butter would work, but I love the tahini flavor in this, so give it a try. You might end up liking it when it's mixed with chocolate. Whisk it all together and then just set it aside for a few minutes for it to cool a little bit. And let's get the rest of the ingredients in the mixture. So we are going to need a cup of orange juice. Orange and sesame go well together. Orange goes well with chocolate too. 1 cup, there's a little bit more, I'm just gonna put it in there. So the recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, but I love cinnamon, so I'm gonna go ahead and put 2. It's up to you how much you want to put in there. 1 is basic, 2 is if you want to kick it up a little bit. Okay, so the chocolate has not cooled down enough yet because I'm doing the video and I'm trying to do things at the same time. If I wasn't doing a video and I was at home making this just as a normal person, like I did when I was testing, I would melt the chocolate first so it can have a chance to cool and then add it to the egg mixture. But since I didn't do that, I'm just gonna temper it a little bit. I'm gonna temper the egg mixture a little bit with the hot chocolate, and I'm just gonna add it a little bit at a time so that way the eggs don't scramble. But if you have time to let it cool a little bit, let it cool. Oh, chocolate smells so good. And now we're gonna add the dry ingredients, the flour. Just whisk them in. It's a thin batter, and that's what's gonna make it so nice and fudgy. Don't be afraid of it. If you wanna double this batter, then you're gonna have enough to fill a 9 by 13 inch baking pan. Right now we're using an 8-inch square baking pan, which I'm gonna get ready. So an 8-inch square baking pan, I have a sheet of parchment paper. I baked some cookies on this and I'm reusing it. I don't like to waste, so I save parchment paper, you guys. You should too. Okay. Before I put it in here, I'm just gonna spray it with a little bit of pan spray. You can brush it with some oil if you prefer. Now I used olive oil. It's more of a refined olive oil. A pure cold pressed olive oil would be very heavy for this recipe, so I don't recommend it. You can use coconut oil. It will leave a little bit of a coconut flavor, so it's up to you. Or your favorite vegetable oil. I know some people have strong feelings about using vegetable oil. I'm one of them. I'm not a really big fan, but I will leave it up to you. Pour all of the batter into the pan. And then for a little added richness, if you have chocolate chunks or chocolate chips, you can just sprinkle them on top. If you're using coconut oil because you like the flavor, you could even put some shredded coconut on top of this. Leaving it up to you once again, but this is my favorite combination. It's ready for the oven. My oven is preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. This is gonna bake on the center rack for about 35 to 40 minutes. It is still going to be pretty wet in the center. It's not gonna be completely cooked through. I mean, it is going to be cooked through, but it is going to be moist in the center, and that is how I like it. The thing about that is once it comes out, it's going to take a couple of hours before it's ready. First, it needs to come to room temperature. Then you need to either put it in the freezer for an hour or so, or keep it refrigerated for a few hours until it completely sets, because if you were to go and cut into it, it'll be more like a molten lava cake, and it's going to be hard to serve like that. I don't recommend it unless you're making it in little ramekins and you're going to scoop some ice cream on top of that, which is not a bad idea. That's pretty delicious sounding. But anyway, about 35 to 40 minutes, max 45 minutes if your oven cooks on the slower side. But you do want the corners to be cooked and kind of puffy, but the center is going to be gooey and moist and fudgy and delicious. I'll show you what it looks like as soon as it comes out. Okay, so the brownies are ready. Now, the hardest part of making this recipe is waiting because they are so fudgy and moist and just gooey in the center. The setting time is really the longest time, and I recommend that you let these set in the refrigerator for like 3 or 4 hours once they're completely cooled. I actually prefer that you do this overnight. Let them sit in there. Once they're completely cooled, wrap them with some plastic wrap so that way they don't absorb any smells from the refrigerator. You could even freeze them and then let them sit in the refrigerator or the freezer until they cool completely and they're perfectly set. I didn't do that, so I have a feeling I'm going to regret cutting into them, but I do have another batch that I made yesterday using the flax egg substitute, which was 4 tablespoons of ground flax seeds with a half a cup of water. But the measurements are always on the blog, so you guys don't worry. But anyway, so I did test that because I wanted to make sure that it worked. The difference in taste is basically using the flax eggs, it is a little bit more earthy. That's the thing. Otherwise, you can barely taste it. It naturally tastes a little bit more earthy because the tahini is in there and the olive oil. It's going to be delicious. So if you want to swap out the flax eggs for pumpkin puree, that would work too. It'll make it extra moist, but it does make them a little more dense. So it's up to you. And it makes it a little bit, I hate to say gluey, but basically it's more of that type of a consistency, if that makes any sense. But that will all be on the blog post. Let's cut into these. Fingers crossed, and hope that the whole thing doesn't fall apart because I do need to take pictures for the blog. Okay, I know that the center is very, very fudgy still and it hasn't set, so I'm just gonna be very careful. But do you see how the top part starts to break off just like a regular brownie does? You know it's gonna be good. Oh, not too bad. Look at how moist they are in the center. See that? Oh my goodness. Delicious. Okay, I'm gonna put this aside and I will show you what the other ones look like that my kids have already dug into. Can you see? They've taken spoonfuls out of this. But this is what the one with the flax seeds look like. Very fudgy. It's been out too, so that does make a difference. Very fudgy. The corners still did rise because we put extra baking powder, not soda. I put a teaspoon of baking powder in the one without the eggs using the flax seeds and half a teaspoon in the other one when I use the eggs. But I just want to show you. See how gooey the center is? I love that. And when it's cold, it holds together. It's like you're eating bites of fudge. So I'm going to put this one aside now that you know what that looks like. So you know you can make these 100% vegan. And I'm going to put this on a plate and take a bite. Amazing. It's so chocolatey. I can taste the tahini in there, but it's in the background. It's not like bam in your face. Like tahini is a very strong flavor. It's toasted sesame seeds, if you're wondering, that are ground up into like a butter, like a peanut butter type thing. Today we're making a vegan tahini cake with chocolate and coconut. It's delicious, it's moist, and it's also not too sweet. It comes together in one big bowl. Let's get started. All right, we're gonna start off by greasing a 9 by 13 inch baking pan. You can grease it with baking spray, but since I'm gonna be using light olive oil to make this, I'm just gonna drizzle some in here and brush it all around. You can use a coconut oil for this recipe too. I don't have any right now, but coconut oil would be perfect since there's already coconut in the recipe. What you don't want to use is a extra virgin cold pressed olive oil because it's going to be a little bit bitter and too heavy. Next, let's go over the dry ingredients. I have 3 cups or 400 grams of all-purpose flour, a heaping teaspoon of cinnamon, 2 tablespoons of baking powder. It sounds like a lot, but it's going to make the cake nice and light, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I'm just going to whisk them all together before I start whisking the wet ingredients. Because once you whisk wet, you're going to need a different whisk, or you're going to have to wash it and dry it before you put it in the dry ingredients. Okay, that's done. Now we're going to whisk up the wet ingredients. So for the wet ingredients, we are going to need a 1/2 cup of coconut oil or your favorite vegetable oil. I like to use a light olive oil. I like to buy it from Costco. It's slightly refined, but it still has a little bit of olive flavor, a little bit of the fruitiness, but none of the heaviness, which is really nice. And then my favorite brand of tahini, not sponsored, is this brand over here, Soom. It's nice and light and very pourable. Since I have about a cup, which is all we need, 240 grams, I'm not even gonna bother mixing it, but whenever you open a jar of tahini, you wanna make sure you mix it because the oil rises to the top. If you are not a fan of tahini, you can substitute your favorite nut butter in here. So you can do almond butter, peanut butter, cashew butter, whatever your heart desires, you could use that. Then I'm gonna add 1.5 cups of granulated sugar. You can go with 1 if you like it just a little bit lightly sweetened. And we need some baking soda in this. I like to add baking soda with the dry ingredients Just a teaspoon of it. A teaspoon of pure vanilla extract and 2 teaspoons of pure almond extract. Almond and coconut go really nice together. Okay, and I should have started off by mixing my egg substitute, which is a flax egg. I have 2 to 3 tablespoons of water in there. The recipe calls for 2.5 tablespoons. I don't really get the half. I always end up putting 3 tablespoons. And 1 tablespoon of ground up flax seeds. This is going to help bind everything all together. Vegan cakes tend to be a little bit on the crumbly side. They don't have the egg in there, and this just helps the mixture stay together. And then I have this unsweetened vanilla coconut milk. I like to add this in here too. You can use almond milk if that's what you have, whatever you have on hand. We're going to need 1 1/3 cups of it. And that's all for the wet ingredients. Before we add the dry ingredients to this, I'm going to chop up my chocolate. The recipe calls for 6 ounces of semi-sweet or dark chocolate. I think that the dark chocolate is a little bit too dark for it, but if you like a less sweet flavor, go with the dark chocolate. I'm using semi-sweet, and this is actually 8 ounces because each bar is 4 ounces. I'm not going to save the little piece of, chocolate for another recipe. I'll just put it all in here. But you can definitely use milk chocolate if that's what you like. And if you don't have chocolate baking bars like this, you can use chocolate chips or chocolate chunks. So I'll add the chocolate in just a little bit. Now I'm gonna add the dry ingredients in a little bit at a time, just until they're incorporated. Okay, don't mix too much. When you have a little bit of flour left, don't go banging the glass bowls around. Just put the chocolate in there so that way you can get coated in the flour and it stays suspended in the cake. Otherwise, sometimes it can sink down to the bottom. And I also have 5 ounces of shredded sweetened coconut. You want to make sure you get the sweet kind. It just adds more sweetness and it's better in the cake. That is between 140 to 150 grams. Just toss everything together in the flour and then add it to the batter. And I like to switch to a spatula to mix this all in, just fold it in all together. If you use the whisk, you can use it, but the bits of chocolate and coconut, the batter is also gonna thicken. It's gonna get stuck in the whisk, basically, the wire parts. Clean as you go. You don't want that chocolate stuck to the bottom of the baking pan and then on your oven. So transfer the batter to the baking pan. Smells so good. Smells like a granola bar right now. So the oven is preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 180 degrees Celsius. This is going to go onto the center rack and it's going to bake for about 35 minutes, maybe 40 minutes. It depends on the oven. Check on it at the 30-minute mark. Once you insert a toothpick in the center of the cake, it should come out clean. Then you know it's ready. Take it out, let it cool completely, and it'll be ready to serve. So the cake took about 43 minutes to cook in my oven, and I could have left it in there for another 5 minutes, but I do like the center to be a little bit fudgy, almost like a brownie. If you like it cooked a little bit drier, you could definitely cook it a little bit more. It does sink in a little bit if you undercook it. It's not really undercooked, but there's no egg in here or anything like that, so you're perfectly fine to take it out at the 40-minute mark so it can be nice and soft and gooey in the center. It's gonna be like kind of like a cake, kind of like a brownie. So delicious. Let it cool completely, and then you can sprinkle some shredded coconut on top. If you want to, you can just do some plain powdered sugar or leave it as is. Put it on a serving platter, make some Greek coffee, and call some friends over because this is definitely good enough to share. Time for the taste test. Perfection, just the right amount of tahini. Today, I'm gonna teach you how to make koulourakia. Koulourakia are classic Greek butter cookies that are usually made around Easter time. And I'm teaching you how to make them without butter, without eggs, just using really good light olive oil to make them. They're gonna be so good, they're so easy to make. Let's get started. Okay, so making this cookie batter is so simple. What we're going to begin with is the dry ingredients, so that way I don't have to switch to another whisk. In this bowl over here, I have 4 cups or 530 grams of all-purpose flour. I'll add 2 teaspoons of baking powder and whisk that all up. Now I'll set it aside and we're going to move on with the wet ingredients. So in this big mixing bowl here, I'll add 1.5 cups of very light olive oil. This is not the good quality cold pressed extra virgin olive oil because that will be too olivey tasting. This is a cookie, you want it to be nice and light. So I like to go with the light olive oil. You can use your favorite vegetable oil instead if you prefer. Next, I'll add 1 cup of granulated sugar, 3 teaspoons of pure vanilla extract, 1 cup of orange juice. You can use fresh or from the store, whatever you have. And I'll also add half a teaspoon of baking soda to this. Whisk everything all together until it's nice and smooth. Then we're going to start adding the flour mixture a little bit at a time, whisking together so that way each batch is incorporated. It's going to look like almost like a pancake batter, but a little bit thicker. It does need to get thicker than this and drier, so I'll have some flour on hand and I'll just continue to add it until the mixture is no longer sticky and it forms a dough. The best way to add it is with your hands and just knead it as you go. Just try to not overwork the dough, but once it's at this consistency, when it's no longer sticky and it's not falling apart, that's how you know your dough is ready. But before you use it, it is a good idea to let it rest for a little bit. So cover it with a clean kitchen towel and just set it aside for 15 minutes. Okay, in order to shape the kulurakia, we're gonna first portion out the dough. So each ball of dough should weigh about 35 grams. It's about the size of a walnut. If you have a scale, just take it out and use it at this time. It's gonna make your life so easy and it's gonna help you keep them all uniform in size. If you don't, then it's fine. Then we're gonna take one at a time, and the dough is, as you work with it, by the time you get to the last ones, there's gonna be oil everywhere. These do release lots of oil, but don't worry about it. They're gonna be so delicious. Squeeze the dough together to kind of help it hold its shape, and then roll it out into a rod that's between 6 to 8 inches long. If it starts to break on you, then it needs to be squeezed together a little bit more. And just do that, just bunch it back up and just squeeze it together and then roll it out again. Then I like to fold it in half like this and twist it so that way it looks like a braid or like a little rope. You can do so many different shapes with this. An S shape is also really common. So once you form it out into a rod, put it on a baking tray that's lined with parchment paper, and then you could form it into an S. You could also do it into little circles. Traditionally, these are sprinkled on the top with sesame seeds, but my kids don't like sesame, so I'm going to leave these plain. They're still going to be nice and beautiful to look at and still very delicious. But if you do want sesame on top, you can brush them with a little bit of simple syrup and then sprinkle the sesame on top. That'll add some more color and will also help the sesame seeds stick. It's up to you, but I'm leaving them without sesame seeds. And the twists are my favorite, so I'm gonna make more twists than I am any other shape. They're all looking so good. These are unfortunately not cookies that kids are gonna be able to help you with just because of how finicky they are with the releasing a lot of oil. They kind of break a lot, especially when you get towards the end. You might need a tiny bit more flour. I didn't add any flour, I just dealt with the oil problem because I wanted them to be nice and tender. The more flour you add to these cookies, the drier and tougher they become. So I'm gonna leave it up to you how you're gonna make them. Okay, so once you assemble the cookies and they're on parchment lined baking trays, the oven should be preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And these are gonna bake for about 20 to 25 minutes or until they're nice and golden. If you're baking more than one tray at a time, make sure to rotate them so that way they bake evenly. Once they're golden around the edges, they're ready. Take them out of the oven and let them sit at room temperature so that way they can cool down. Make some coffee in the meantime, call some friends over. I usually have freezer instructions for you for baked goods, but these cookies do not freeze well. But they do last long at room temperature, so it works out either way. They are so flavorful because I put lots of vanilla in there, some orange. I stayed away from the cinnamon because I have lots of cinnamon in my latakulura recipe, which is almost identical to this minus the warm spices. If you do love that, you can put the warm spices in here, but I wanted to give more of the characteristic kulurakia flavor to them, and that's why I left the cinnamon out, but they're so good. You can add some lemon zest to these too if you'd like and leave the orange out. Time for the taste test, and I'll take one of the little twists. Oh my goodness. So good. I love butter. I can eat butter on everything, but I don't miss the butter in these. There's so much flavor in them. They have the same texture as a regular kuluraki does. And like I said, they're super easy to make. They'll keep fresh in a cookie jar or in an airtight container at room temperature for a week or two. Today we're going to be making a delicious fig cake that's perfect for tea and coffee. This recipe is really nice because it's dairy-free and completely vegan, which is perfect if you're fasting for Lent. So let's get started. Okay, so we're gonna begin by preparing our pan. I have a 9 by 13 inch baking pan here that I'm just gonna spray with some avocado spray. You could brush it with olive oil if you'd like. And now we're gonna get the figs done. So I have a pound of dried figs here. This is a really nice recipe to use with dried figs if you have them on hand. If you don't, you can substitute dates for this. And if you're using dates, just skip this step because they're already soft enough. I'm adding 4 cups of boiling hot water to the dates, and I'm gonna let them sit while I prepare all the rest of the ingredients. So over here I have 1 cup of walnuts, and I'm just gonna roughly chop them. You can definitely put these through a food processor and get them a little finer. And pecans are a nice substitute for this, macadamias or hazelnuts. All of those go well. So over here I have 3 cups or 400 grams of all-purpose flour. To that I'm gonna add a tablespoon of baking powder, about a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1 heaping teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves. And I'm just gonna whisk that all together. Dry ingredients are ready. Now we're gonna get the wet ingredients prepared. And this all can get done in one big bowl, so it's very simple. So I'm gonna add 1/2 cup of olive oil. This is a light olive oil. You can use your favorite vegetable oil for this. That doesn't have that much flavor. A cold pressed olive oil would be a little bit too bitter, so I wouldn't use that. And then I'm gonna add 1 cup of tahini. This is gonna give it a lot of earthy flavor and a little bit of a fudgy consistency. So this is not sponsored or anything like that, but this is a very good brand of tahini. If you shop at Whole Foods or if you can get it online on Amazon, the 365 brand is really nice, and so is the Soom brand, S-O-O-M. Those are really good quality tahinis. Every time I get them, they taste fresh. Now I'm gonna add 1/2 cup of freshly squeezed orange juice, a teaspoon of baking soda. I like to add the baking soda to the wet ingredients so that way it incorporates well and you don't get a bite of that bitterness in the cake. And then for an egg substitute, because you do need something that's gonna help this hold together, if you're not worried about keeping this vegan, you can add 2 eggs at this point. Otherwise, it's 1 tablespoon of ground flax seeds. To the 1 tablespoon of flax seeds, I'm just gonna thin it out with 3 tablespoons of water. And I'm just gonna use some of this fig water actually. I'm gonna add this in a second. I'm just gonna give it a chance to soften up. And then 1.5 cups of granulated sugar. Mix that all together. And 2 to 3 teaspoons of pure vanilla extract. I always go with 3. When it comes to vanilla, the more the better. Vanilla and cinnamon both, I love those 2 flavorings. So mix that all up, and now I can add the flax egg mixture. At this point, the figs should be nice and soft. You can go ahead and get them out of the water. We are gonna use some of this water in the cake, but first we're gonna chop these up. Okay, just go ahead and cut off that hard stem, and then roughly chop each fig. You can cut them as big or as small as you like, it's up to you. So now we're gonna add a cup of this fig water to the wet ingredients. If you want even more flavor, instead of water, you can heat up some orange juice and get it steaming hot, and you can soak the figs in that. Half water, half orange juice, it's completely up to you. Now we're gonna go on and add the dry ingredients a little bit at a time. I'm just gonna leave a little bit of the flour in the bowl so that way we can toss the walnuts in there. That way they don't sink down to the bottom. As soon as all of the flour is incorporated, I'm gonna switch to a spatula and add the walnut mixture along with the figs. You can zest an orange and put it in here if you'd like. Sweetened shredded coconut would be also really nice in this. Add some sweetness and another layer of flavor. Just mix this all up with a spatula. And that's it. The batter is ready as soon as everything is incorporated. Go ahead and pour it all into the prepared pan. And this is gonna bake in a preheated 350-degree oven on the middle rack for about 35 to 45 minutes. You'll know it's ready when a toothpick that's inserted into the center comes out clean or with some moist crumbs attached. Once it comes out of the oven, you want to let it cool completely, and then we're going to make a nice icing that's going to go on top. Okay, so while the cake is baking, go ahead and make the icing. So for the icing, go ahead and add 1.5 cups of confectioner sugar to a bowl with between 3 to 5 tablespoons of orange juice. Now, how much orange juice you're going to add is going to depend on the consistency that you like. I like it to be a pourable consistency, but not opaque or see-through. The more orange juice you add, the thinner the icing is going to get, and then it's going to almost look see-through if you add too much, so don't add too much. If you do end up adding too much, you can make it a little thicker with confectioner sugar, but go slow. That's a nice tip to keep in mind. Once the cake is baked and it comes out of the oven, let it cool completely, then go ahead and cut it into the desired portion sizes that you're going to want to serve it in, and then you could either drizzle the icing on top or you could leave it on the side so that way your guests can add as much or as little icing as they like. You can also omit the icing from the recipe if you don't like the added sweetness and just dust it with some powdered sugar. You can dust it with powdered sugar and shredded sweetened coconut. That's an option, but this is delicious. Time for the taste test. So good. You get the warmth from the cinnamon and the cloves, the chewiness from the figs, a little crunch from the walnuts, and that icing just adds a little bit of orange to it, which freshens it up because tahini does leave a little bit of an earthy flavor. The whole combination is amazing. Today we're making olive oil tahini sesame cookies. You can call them sesame cookies, tahini cookies. They are made with olive oil, but you can use your favorite vegetable oil. We'll talk about the oil in a little bit. These are so good. They're very light and sweet. They're vegan, so that's great if you're fasting for Lent or if you just want dairy-free, egg-free option. This is it. They last long on the countertop in an airtight container or in a cookie jar. They go so good with coffee or with a big glass of milk. Let's get started. So you don't need any fancy equipment for this, just a couple of bowls and a whisk. Okay, I'm gonna start with the dry ingredients so that way I only need one whisk for this. So over here I have 3.5 cups or 500 grams of all-purpose flour. I have 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. You can use 1 if you're not a huge fan of cinnamon. A little bit of salt. This is a 1/4 teaspoon of salt and 2 teaspoons of baking powder. I am not going to whisk them together yet because I need orange zest in this. Orange is really nice with sesame. It brightens it up. Sesame tends to be a heavier flavor. It's a more grown-up flavor. I guess think of it like grown-up peanut butter or something like that. If you're not a huge fan of sesame, you can use almond butter. You can use peanut butter if you really want to. It is going to have a heavy peanutty flavor. It is up to you. But if you get the sesame brand that I recommend, it's perfect. It's nutty, it's nice and light. It has just the right amount of sesame taste in it, and it's not bitter or burnt tasting like some can be. So I like to put the zest of 2 oranges. You can do just 1. And go ahead and whisk them all together. Easy peasy. Now for the wet ingredients. So I have 1 cup of granulated sugar, that's 200 grams. To that, I'm gonna add a cup of orange juice, 2 teaspoons of pure vanilla extract. I'm also gonna add the baking soda right now. I always like to add the baking soda to the acid so that way you don't get that bitter flavor from it or the bitter taste from it. So just 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. And 1 cup of light, and 1 cup of light olive oil. When I say light, I mean not the expensive kind that you put in salads that's extra virgin cold pressed. That is gonna make the cookies too heavy. This is one that I get from Costco. I don't know if you guys have a Costco nearby. If you don't have this kind of olive oil, you could use whatever vegetable oil you like and trust that's very lightly flavored. And if you don't mind the taste of coconut, you can use coconut oil instead. I think the refined coconut oils have less of a coconutty flavor. I'll leave it all up to you. And the tahini. This is my favorite brand, Soom Tahini. It's very nice and light and nutty. Perfect amount of sesame flavor, like I said. This is not sponsored, by the way. It's just a brand that I really enjoy. 1/2 cup of it. This is really good. And Whole Foods 365 brand, that one is really good too. They make an organic tahini that's just as good as this one. So mix everything together until the sugar has dissolved. And then you're gonna add the flour ingredients in 2 or 3 batches. And once the batter gets a little bit too thick for the whisk to handle, you could switch to a spatula. And if you want to, you can do all of this in a stand mixer, like a KitchenAid mixer. It's totally fine. And this is a very sticky batter. You're not going to want to use it right away because you won't be able to form this into cookies. You're going to set it aside, cover it with a clean kitchen towel for about 15 or 20 minutes until it sets. Then we're going to form the cookies. Meantime, I'm going to clean up. Okay, so now after 15-20 minutes, the cookies should be ready to be formed. The dough does set a little more, as you can see, as it sits. If you were to go ahead and try to form them as soon as they're made, it's just going to be impossible. So just set it aside. You want to get 2 or 3 trays lined with parchment paper. I made these cookies yesterday and I'm reusing the same parchment paper. As you can see, there are some sesame seeds still on them. You can reuse parchment paper. There's no point in wasting it. You also want to have a plate with sesame seeds in it. These are not toasted, these are just plain sesame seeds. And you're going to take a tablespoon at a time of the dough, or a walnut sized amount, and then you can roll it first into a little ball. You can just roll all of them out first if you want to, or do one at a time. And then you roll it into about 4 or 5 inch rope like this. And at this point, you could do a few things. You can take the rope as it is. Okay, so here's one thing. If it starts to fall apart on you, you could just rework it. The more you work the dough, the easier it's going to be for it to roll out. If it tends to be a little too sticky still, which it shouldn't, or if it starts to crumble and break still, then you could add a little bit more flour. But the more flour you add to the dough, the heavier your cookies are going to be. So you can roll it in the sesame seeds, and then you could put it on the tray and form it. You could form it into a little circle. You could do a little S shape. It's going to be completely up to you. There's a little circle. Let's do one more in an S shape. Now, it's a good idea to form them directly on the trays. This is how you do an S shape, obviously. Leave some space in between them. If you form the shapes on the cutting board and then transfer them, they're going to fall apart. These are very delicate cookies. Now, that's how you do it with the sesame seeds on top. You can leave out the sesame seeds. You'll naturally have some sesame seeds on your fingers and on the board or your work surface. So you can just have just a few sesame seeds like that and make the cookies, or have them totally immersed like this and have them covered in sesame seeds. I'm going to leave that up to you. I'm going to continue making these, and so I don't keep moving the baking pan back and forth. I'm going to form all of the balls right now, and then do one step at a time so it moves a little quicker, so I could have a little kind of like an assembly line going. My kids are not huge fans of sesame seeds, so I'm going to do half or a few with sesame seeds and a few just plain like this. Now, if you want to, you can also sprinkle some sesame seeds on top if you just want a light coating of them. These are all options that you have. You can make these however you like. There you have it. One tray is ready for the oven. So I'm going to continue forming the cookies. In the meantime, I'm going to put this tray in there. The oven is preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. They're going to bake for about 20 or 25 minutes. The less you bake them, the softer they're going to be in the center. I like them a little bit on the crispy side. They're still going to be a little bit soft on the inside because of that tahini. I'll show you what they look like as soon as they come out. So the cookies were ready in 25 minutes, but oven temperatures do vary, and especially if you have 3 trays baking in there at the same time, it might take a little bit longer. If you did put more than 2 trays in there, make sure you do rotate them so that way they bake evenly. 25 minutes is usually what it takes, but if you like them a little bit crispier, you can bake them a little bit longer. If you like them a little bit softer, you can take them out at the 20-minute mark. If you like them soft, let them cool on the baking trays once they come out of the oven, and the bottoms will stay slightly soft. If you want them a little bit crispier, as soon as they come out of the oven, transfer them to a cooling rack and then let them cool completely before you transfer them into either cookie jars or airtight containers. These stay fresh for a while at room temperature. You don't have to refrigerate them. Make some coffee and call some friends over. It is time for the taste test. So good. I prefer them with less sesame seeds on top. They do look really pretty with the sesame seeds, but they're a little bit milder. You do get the flavor of and the nuttiness from the tahini that's in them, the warm spices of the cinnamon and the cloves, and then the orange. It just goes so good together. Today we're making vegan cookies known as mustakulura in Greek. They're basically cookies that are made with grape must, and they're soft, they're a little bit chewy, and they're perfect with a hot cup of coffee. They're even good with a cup of milk if you want to give these to kids. There's no sugar in them. They're made with honey and grape molasses. So I don't know, I guess they're kind of healthy too. Let's get started making them. We're going to begin preparing the dry ingredients. So we need 4 cups of all-purpose flour. And I like to measure loosely in the cup. And then I'm gonna add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda. This keeps them really nice and soft. And 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. And I always do heaping teaspoons because I am a huge fan of cinnamon. 1/2 teaspoon of ground cloves. This adds a really nice warm flavor, similar to baklava. And then just go ahead and whisk everything all together so it's well combined. You can add some orange zest if you want to this, but that's it. The dry ingredients are done. So now in the bowl of a tabletop mixer, I'm going to fit the paddle attachment in a little while. I already have a 1/4 cup of olive oil in there because I put the olive oil in the same container or the same measuring cup that I'm measuring the honey in. That helps the honey just slide out later on when we're going to add it to the mix. So I'm just going to add 1/2 cup more. And this is light olive oil, 1/2 cup of honey. See how it just slides out? And then we need 1 cup of grape molasses. You'll find them in a Middle Eastern grocery store or a Mediterranean grocery store. If you cannot locate them, I'll definitely put a link where you can get this on Amazon online. I'll put that link in the blog post. And then we need a 1/4 cup of fresh orange juice. Just give everything a nice whisk. Add the beater attachment, the flat beater. I'm going to turn the mixer on low speed and I'm going to add the flour a little bit at a time. Once all of the flour is incorporated, I'm going to turn the mixer off and just start making the cookies. So I'm going to drizzle a little bit of olive oil onto my cutting board or my work surface because I don't want to add flour and make these cookies dry. The olive oil is going to help keep them from being too sticky. And the dough should be slightly sticky. If it's more sticky than this or more runny than this, you can add 1/2 cup of flour to it and just beat it a little bit more in the mixer. But you do want it to be a soft and very pliable dough. It's going to help it stay really nice and chewy and soft. Now to one of the portions, I cut them into 2 equal portions. I'm going to add some raisins. Raisins are traditional in this cookie. So if you like them, you can go ahead and add them. I'm just going to kind of mix it up right here on the board. Now I'm going to cut this into little portions. This makes about 30 cookies in total. You want to cut them into walnut-sized pieces. And it seems like there's a little too much oil on the board, so I'll just wipe it down just a little bit. Put a little less than what I did. Now you can cut these or you can form these as big or as small as you like. I like to do kind of like walnut-sized pieces. Some of these are a little bit bigger. We can adjust as we go. And if the dough happens to be a little too sticky still, even after adding the oil on the board, then just cover it with a clean kitchen towel and let it rest for about 15 minutes, and it'll be much easier to handle once it rests a little bit. Okay, so you just want to roll each one of these little balls into about a 6-inch size rope, just like that. And then you can just make it into a little ring, just like I did over here. Put it on a baking tray that's lined with parchment paper. Or you can go ahead and form it into a rope and then just roll it up into a little spiral. So I'm going to keep forming these cookies. I'm going to do little rings and little spirals, and then we're going to go on and bake them. So I formed 31 cookies, but again, it all depends on how big you want to make them or how small you want to make them. I like to make them a little bit bigger because they bake up a little bit softer, so keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that the longer the dough sits, the easier it is to work with. So if it's your first time making them, let the dough sit for about 15 minutes covered with either plastic wrap or with a kitchen towel, and then go ahead and put a little bit of oil on your work surface. They're going to roll out really easily. Preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and bake them anywhere from about 10 to 15 minutes. The 12 o'clock mark on my oven is really the perfect time. That's how long they bake for, 12 minutes, because I like for them to be nice and soft. If you like your cookies a little bit crisper, then bake them for about 20 minutes. So just check them at the 12-minute mark. And if they're nice and soft, they're also going to harden while they sit just a tiny bit. Now it's time for the taste test. So they're still nice and soft, and when you press them, again, they're nice and soft, and they should taste delicious too. Let me take one with a raisin in it. Very nice, light, slightly chewy. They almost have a little bit of a molasses, like a gingerbread type flavor. So delicious. I'm going to teach you how to make chocolate baksimadiya. Chocolate baksimadiya are basically biscotti. They're going to be vegan. This recipe is going to be vegan, which means we're going to have no dairy in here, and it's going to be made with olive oil, a light olive oil. We're going to also put some pistachios in them. We're going to flavor them with some orange. Of course, you can customize it to however you want. You can leave out the pistachios and just put more chocolate chips. You could add some pecans, walnuts, almonds, whatever you like in here. They're going to be so delicious, the perfect cookie to dunk in your coffee. Let's go over the ingredients so we can get started. For the wet ingredients, we're going to need some pure vanilla extract, some fresh orange juice. This is light olive oil. We have some granulated sugar and some brown sugar. This is coffee and a little bit of baking soda. For the dry ingredients, we have some all-purpose flour, some orange zest, a little bit of salt, some cocoa powder. This is Dutch processed, and some baking powder. And over here we have some semi-sweet chocolate chips and some pistachios that have been shelled. This all starts with the wet ingredients. I am using orange juice because I love the combination of chocolate and orange. But if you don't want any orange flavor in it, leave the zest and the juice out and just use the same amount of coffee that you would orange juice. So we're doing half a cup of orange juice and half a cup of coffee. You can just do a whole cup of coffee. Very simple. If you want to leave the coffee out, do water, no problem. But coffee is great because it really brings out the chocolatiness of the chocolate biscotti and anything chocolate. Really, when you're making, if you add a little bit of coffee to it, it wakes it up and it just makes it even more chocolatey and better. So don't leave it out unless you're allergic to caffeine or something like that. To the mixing bowl, I'm going to add half a cup of orange juice, a cup of light olive oil. You can substitute vegetable oil for this if you prefer. Half a cup of coffee. Now you don't have to brew a whole pot of coffee for this. You can just mix some instant coffee and some cool water and you're good to go. But if you do brew coffee and you have some leftover, this is a great recipe to use it in. Next, we're going to add the sugar, the granulated and the brown sugar, and a teaspoon of pure vanilla extract. And the one thing that I forgot to do was to add the baking soda. So when you add the baking soda, don't do what I'm going to do. It's best to dilute it in the orange juice so that way you don't get that little bite of baking soda that sometimes ends up in baked goods when it's not properly mixed in. I'm just going to put it in right now with the wet ingredients, but I highly recommend that you mix it with the orange juice and then you add it. Next, we're just going to whisk together all of the dry ingredients. And before I add the dry ingredients to the wet ingredients, I'm just going to roughly chop the pistachios. So you can put as many pistachios as you want in this. And as a matter of fact, you can use salted pistachios or unsalted. I have slightly salted pistachios because I do like the combination of sweet and a little kick of salt. So I am going to roughly chop these using my knife, but you could pass these through a food processor if you wanted to. So I like for this to be a very rustic biscotti, so I'm going to leave my pistachios like this. Some are cut in half, some are whole, some are chopped up small. I like that combination of textures. I'm going to set it aside. Now I'm going to slowly add the dry ingredients to the wet ingredients. Once all of the dry ingredients are incorporated, you could go in and add your chocolate chips and the pistachios. So you could add a half a cup of pistachios or a whole cup. It's just up to you how much you want in there. Now go ahead and transfer the dough to a work surface that's lightly floured with all-purpose flour. Roll it onto the flour so that way the stickiness sort of goes away. Cut it into 2 equal pieces. Now at this point you could roll both pieces into logs that are about ½ inch thick and about 12 to 13 inches long, and then you can just bake them both off and make biscotti, or you can make half and freeze half. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one portion of the dough because we do not need to have all these biscottis at home, and I'm going to put them on a sheet of parchment paper. I'm going to put it on a sheet of parchment paper, and I'm just going to flatten it out, wrap it up. Once I'm done with this, I'm going to wrap it in plastic wrap, label it, and put it in my freezer. It'll stay fresh in the freezer for about 2 months. Not that it'll last that long in my house anyway, but it'll be ready in there. And then when I want to bake it off, I'm just going to take it out of the freezer and leave it at room temperature. If I'm very organized, then I will thaw it out overnight in my refrigerator and then leave it on the counter until it reaches room temperature, and then continue with whatever I'm going to do right now, form it into a log, and bake it, and then slice it and bake them again. So I formed one of the portions into a log, and I'm going to transfer it onto a baking tray that's lined with parchment paper. And then I'm going to flatten it out a little bit. It is going to spread a little bit while baking. Now at this point you can top it with some more ground pistachios. You can put some sesame seeds on top, or what I like to do is sprinkle some granulated sugar on top. It's going to give it a nice shininess to the top and a little hint of sweetness. And you could even press the sugar in a little bit. Turbinado sugar would be great, but I never have that at home, and I am not an advocate of going out to buy one ingredient to use a bit of in recipes. We use granulated sugar, that's what I have, so that's what I'm going to sprinkle on top of this. My oven is preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to put this in the center rack and let it bake for about 25 minutes or until a toothpick that's inserted in the center comes out clean. You want it to not be doughy at all in the center. Then when it comes out, you want to let it cool at least 10 minutes. Then we're going to go ahead and slice it. Once it comes out of the oven, let it cool for 10 minutes. Then go ahead and put it on a cutting board or on a work surface and slide the parchment paper off. It should come off easily. And you can use that same parchment paper, put it back onto the baking tray, and now it's time to cut them. Now you can cut them as thick as you like. I like to also do this in a diagonal. It's also a good idea to keep a paper towel handy to constantly wipe your knife. If your knife is dirty, it's going to cause the biscotti to crumble. And then place them on the baking tray standing up. So put them on their side. My oven is preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Place the baking tray in the center rack of the oven and let them bake until they're perfectly dry and crisp. That's going to take about 25 to 30 minutes. So the chocolate biscotti came out of the oven. Once they come out of the oven, you want them to cool completely. Now you can bake them as crisp as you want them, or you can even bake them so they can be a little tiny bit softer or chewier. Now the paximadia or biscotti are usually very dry and crisp, but it's all up to you. I like mine a little bit undercooked, or I should say they're still fully cooked, but a slight bit soft. So again, it's up to you. Mine baked for 25 minutes at 350, but if you want them to be drier and crisper, then lower the temperature to 325 degrees Fahrenheit and let them bake all the way up to 40 minutes. Keep a close eye on them because you do not want them to burn. Let them cool completely. Make a cup of Greek coffee. Put them on a platter and call some friends over because these are delicious. It is time to take a bite, and the best way for me to eat these, I love to dunk them in my coffee. I have a cup of Greek coffee here, and it is time to do the best part of making these videos, tasting them. This is so good. Today I'm going to teach you how to make a vegan biscotti that's going to be made with olive oil, orange juice, and orange zest, and also some almonds. So flavorful and delicious, you will not miss the dairy or the eggs. Now in Greece, these are known as paximadia throughout Greece, but this particular one that I'm going to make today comes from Crete, the part that I'm from, and they're known as kalorizika. So they're delicious. They're a twice-baked cookie that is perfect for dunking in your coffee. So we're going to go over the ingredients right now and we're going to start making them. We're going to need some pure vanilla extract, some granulated sugar. This is light olive oil, but you could use vegetable oil instead. We're going to need the zest and the juice of orange, or 1 or 2 oranges. We have some all-purpose flour, a little bit of salt, baking powder, baking soda, and these are some almonds that we've toasted in the oven at 350 degrees for 7 minutes. So I'm using a light olive oil to make this, so that way you don't have too much of an olive taste in it. Light olive oil is basically the more inexpensive olive oil at the supermarket. It's lighter in color and lighter in olive flavor. If you can't find it, or if you'd rather use vegetable oil, feel free to do so. So I'm going to add the olive oil to the mixer, the granulated sugar, and the pure vanilla extract. So we're going to need a cup of orange juice in here as well, but we also need the zest of the orange in the mixture. So we're going to zest the orange first, and then we're going to juice it. So we need the zest of 1 orange. That's good. When you get down to the lighter color, the whiter part of the orange, you do not want to zest that part because that's bitter. So the zest is in the dry ingredients. Now we're going to juice the oranges. That looks like 1 cup. I had to juice 3 oranges. It all depends on how juicy your oranges are. Now you might be wondering why I have the baking soda separate from the dry ingredients. Sometimes when baking soda isn't sifted in properly with the dry ingredients, like when you're taking a shortcut like I am, when I'm just going to whisk them together, you get an extra bite of baking soda in your baked goods, like your cookies or your cake, and it just has that awful salty, bitter type taste. So I found that diluting it in the juice, it just makes it so much better. It just dilutes into the batter, and you don't get that, that taste that you're not looking for. So I'm going to put half of the juice in first, and then the remaining juice, just because this measuring cup is small and this is going to bubble up once I add the baking soda to it. See how it bubbles up? So now I'm going to add it to the wet ingredients in the mixer, and I'm just going to mix this all up until it's all combined. So just whisk all the dry ingredients together. Now I'm going to roughly chop these almonds that are toasted. So all I did, I preheated my oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and I popped them in there for 7 minutes just until they became nice and fragrant and toasted. Toasting nuts before you add them to a cookie recipe or any other recipe really intensifies their flavor. So we're just going to roughly chop them. Now, of course, you can do this in a food processor. So now my dry ingredients are ready. You can definitely spice this up even more by adding a ½ teaspoon of ground cinnamon to this, a little pinch of cloves. You could also do anise seeds. Anise seeds have that really nice licorice, bright type flavor that's just fabulous in this. You could do a couple tablespoons, 1 to 2 tablespoons of anise seeds, because anise and almond go so good together. But I'm going to keep it just basic the way it is right now. Now to my wet ingredients, I'm going to add the dry ingredients, a little bit at a time. So I'm going to let the mixers mix on low speed and add the dry ingredients a little bit at a time. And I'm going to put the almonds in all the way at the end. So the dough is ready, and it is going to be a sticky dough. So you're going to want to put some all-purpose flour on your work surface and transfer the dough to the work surface and cut it into 2 equal portions. So now we're just going to roll it out into a log. The best part about this dough is it does make a lot of biscotti, and you can take half of it and form it into the log and then bake it and then do whatever we're going to do next to form the biscotti. And you can take the other half and you could wrap it in parchment paper and then in plastic and freeze it. And it freezes well up to 2 months, maybe even more. I mean, that kind of stuff never lasts in my freezer. But if you're very disciplined, it will last a while. And if you are going to freeze it, then go ahead and do what I said. Wrap it in parchment first and in plastic so it stays nice and fresh and it doesn't absorb the smells of the freezer. And then when you're ready to bake it, just thaw it overnight in your refrigerator. Or if you're in a hurry and you didn't plan ahead, take it out of the freezer, thaw it on your countertop. When it comes to room temperature, just do whatever we're going to do next. And now I have a baking tray that's lined with parchment paper. I'm just going to transfer this log over here that I formed. You want it to be about 1/2 inch in thickness, and as wide as it goes, it's going to be about 12 to 13 inches long. And you can use the help of the parchment paper to help shape it. At this point, you could sprinkle the top with some sesame seeds. You can grind up some more almonds or chop up some more almonds and sprinkle the top with almonds. I like to sprinkle it with granulated sugar, just for a little bit of a shine and some added sweetness. Keep in mind that this is going to spread, so if you are making both logs, you cook them separately on 2 separate baking trays. Don't put them together, otherwise it's going to join and become one weird deformed log. So preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Let this bake for 25 to 30 minutes or until it is fully cooked. You want it to be like cake, so if you were to insert a toothpick into the center, it should come out clean and not doughy. So you want to make sure once the first log comes out of the oven that you set it aside at room temperature for at least 10 minutes so that we can cool a little bit before you handle it. Now it's time to slice it. It should slide right off of the parchment paper. Now we're just I like to slice it in diagonals, and this is a matter of choice or a matter of preference. You can slice it as thin or as thick as you like your biscottis. And then place the cookies on a baking tray that's lined with parchment paper. Now we're going to put them back in the oven on the center rack to bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 to 20 minutes or until they're nice and crisp and fully cooked through. I'll show you what they look like as soon as they're done. So once the biscotti are baked, you want to let them cool down completely. Now it's going to be a matter of preference if you want them slightly chewy or if you want them super dry and crisp. So the more crisp or dry you want them, the longer you have to cook them. You could even reduce the temperature of the oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit and let them bake in the oven for about 30 to 40 minutes. Keep an eye on them. You do not want them to burn. But I do like mine a little slightly on the chewy side. I know that's not what a traditional biscotti or paksimadi is supposed to be like, but that's just me. That's how I like it. You can make it however you like. It's easy to control. It just all depends on the baking time. So you're going to want to have a nice cup of Greek coffee ready like I do, or tea, or even if you want to dunk it in milk, be my guest. It is time to take a bite. So aromatic. These are delicious, you guys. Today we're going to be making Phanourios, also known as Saint Phanourios cake. It's made every year on August 27th to celebrate Saint Phanourios, Agios Phanourios. It's also known as the cake for lost things, and it's delicious. It's a vegan cake that doesn't have any eggs in it, obviously, or any dairy, but it does have the warm spices of cinnamon and cloves, and then you can put anything you want in it, like dried fruit or even chocolate. We're going to be putting walnuts and raisins in it, but we're going to go over the substitutes as we move through the recipe. Let's get started. So I have a 10-inch round baking pan that I've lined with parchment paper. I'm just going to prepare it by spraying some avocado oil in here. You can also brush it with olive oil. Put the parchment paper in there so the cake comes out easily, and I'll even spray the parchment paper a little bit. The pan is now prepared, so I'm going to begin by getting the dry ingredients ready. I have 3 cups of all-purpose flour, 410 grams, and 2 teaspoons or 10 grams of baking powder. And I'm going to add the spices. So ground cinnamon, 1 heaping teaspoon. I always go heavy with cinnamon because I love it. Half a teaspoon of cloves. I don't go heavy on cloves because it becomes bitter if you add too much. But cloves and cinnamon give it that baklava flavor. The zest of 2 clementines or 1 orange. And I'm just going to whisk that all together before I whisk the wet ingredients together. The best thing about this recipe, other than it tastes delicious, is you don't need a mixer to do this. It all comes together in a big bowl by hand in just a few minutes. In the big bowl, I'm going to add olive oil. So we need 3/4 of a cup of your favorite light vegetable oil. I use a light olive oil, not an extra virgin cold pressed, because that would leave too much of an olive flavor. We want a milder oil, so use whatever oil you love and trust. Then 1.5 cups of granulated sugar. You can put a little less if you want it less sweet. Whisk that all up. And then I have 1.25 cups of orange juice. I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of baking soda to the juice, and it's going to froth up, but it's also going to dissolve in here, so when we mix it to the cake, you won't get any of that bitterness that's usually in baking soda. It's going to help keep the cake nice and soft. A teaspoon of pure vanilla extract. Not traditional, but I always add it. And then go ahead and add the dry ingredients. Whisk it up until the flour is absorbed and the mixture is smooth, but don't overmix. Oh, it smells so good already. That's it, the batter is ready. At this point, you can bake it as is, but I'm adding half a cup of raisins, half a cup of ground walnuts, and I put a couple teaspoons of flour in here so that way these don't sink to the bottom of the cake. You can use your favorite nuts or dried fruit, cranberries, pecans, almonds, dried cherries, dates, figs, whatever you like, or you can just leave the nuts and the raisins out and add some chocolate and just fold that in. That wasn't even 5 minutes. Then just pour the batter into the prepared pan. And just smooth everything out so it bakes evenly. The oven is preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. This is going to bake on the center rack for about 55 minutes to an hour and 5 minutes. Keep an eye on it. At 55 minutes, check it. It should spring back when you touch it, or a toothpick that's inserted into the center of the cake should come out clean or with a few crumbs attached. That's how you know it's ready. Once it comes out of the oven, run a knife around the edges to loosen it and release it from the pan. Then let it sit in the pan for about 15-20 minutes or until it cools to room temperature, and then it's going to be ready to transfer it onto your serving platter. You can serve it as is, or you can dust some powdered sugar on top, also known as confectioner sugar. Make some coffee, and then we're going to do the taste test. So my cake was ready in exactly 55 minutes. I let it cool and all that good stuff. And if you want to put a nice little pretty pattern on top with powdered sugar, if you have a stencil of a doily or any kind of stencil that you like, you put it on top. I used one of my actual doilies. I just put them on top and needed to be washed anyway. And then I dusted some powdered sugar on top just so you can get a pretty pattern. That's just something extra. They do this a lot in Greece, so I thought it would be really pretty to do it. But you can leave it plain. You can leave the sugar out because it is sweet enough. It just adds a little hint of sweetness. Time for the taste test. It's nice and cool already. This is perfect. I think that you're going to be making this throughout the fall. It has all those delicious flavors of the orange, the warm cinnamon, the cloves. It tastes delicious. The raisins in there are nice and chewy and sweet. I love the little crunch from the walnuts. I think you guys are going to really love this one. The exact measurements are on the website, www.dimitrasdishes.com. Let me know in the comment section if you have any recipe requests. I'll get to them as soon as I can. Thank you guys so much for spending time with me today. I'll see you all next time. Yes, us.